these recordings are not going to be shared immediately. They will be shared after today's and tomorrow's lecture is over, because those recordings then keep circulating, and I would rather encourage you to see the next day's program and read up, rather than keep looking at the older recordings. But rest assured that we will be sharing the recordings for those of you who have missed the previous sessions. Also, as regards questions, we are looking at whatever questions have come in. Those major topics which you feel that have not been addressed, we will try to take up those topics. But of course, it will be impossible to share everything. I've already shared two YouTube channels on the group. One is by Parulekar sir and one is by Dr. Virkud sir. Both are excellent channels, and you will get a lot of information from those channels. But other doubts that you may have, we will clarify. Maybe we'll take one particular day and we'll clarify all the doubts. Any major doubts that you have, as you put them up on the group, I'm clarifying them. But small doubts that may not actually interest everyone, we are not going to clarify right now. We will clarify if you still have them at the end of all the sessions. So with that, let us begin today's session on hysteroscopy. So first of all, I am not going to go into the very basics of it, but you all know already what is hysteroscopy: the ability to look inside the uterine cavity to diagnose intrauterine pathologies. Now, as far as the exam is concerned, hysteroscopy has quite a bit of importance in terms of theory exams as well as practical exams. At least of late, a lot of more questions have been asked more in the theory exam rather than the practical exam as regards hysteroscopy. Because the topic is vast, it is physically impossible to cover in the span of 1 hour each and every question that is going to be asked under the hysteroscopy heading. But still, as there are some basic principles in laparoscopy, there are some basic principles in hysteroscopy also. So in case we are going to try to touch up on these principles mainly. Okay, so let's see one by one. Again, if you have any query, please put it up on the group so that one of us will be able to see and reply. Okay, so let us start. What is hysteroscopy? The ability to look inside the uterine cavity. And what are the common abnormalities that we expect to find inside the uterus? Okay, so there are mainly 6 specific abnormalities for which we do hysteroscopy and which are correctable by operative hysteroscopy: endometrial polyps, submucous fibroids, intrauterine synechia, also called as Asherman syndrome. That's a single N, I'm sorry, it's not a double N. Septum, T-shaped uterus, and foreign bodies. By far, these are the only pathologies that you will find inside commonly. Uncommon pathologies are a lot. We are not really concerning ourselves with them right now. Okay. So, what are the indications of hysteroscopy? Patients of infertility, patients of abnormal uterine bleeding, patients having recurrent pregnancy loss, and removal of foreign bodies. By far, these are the only indications of performing a hysteroscopy in any patient. Of course, there will be places where patients have AUB and infertility, recurrent pregnancy losses, but patient presents to you saying that she is infertile, so on and so forth. But these two slides are mainly for the purpose of writing your theory answer, not from the viva or the practical point of view. Again, having said that, I am yet to see a student who has told me that they were given a hysteroscope or a hysteroscope sheath in the exam. Okay, so most often you will not be shown the hysteroscope sheath or the hysteroscope in the exam, but still it is worthwhile noting what it exactly is. So the hysteroscope, like the telescope, is a it's an optic basically. It has got a rod lens system. So this much part is called the rod lens system. There is a channel where you can attach the light cable. This is called as the light port. And there is a place through which you can see. That means you can attach the camera. This is called as an eyepiece. If you had to pick up the telescope or it was given in the exam, you would describe it as having a rod lens system, a light port, and an eyepiece where the camera is attached. Now, the main difference between hysteroscopy and laparoscopy in terms of how you perform it is that in laparoscopy, the abdominal cavity is distended by CO2 gas. It does not require a large amount of pressure to distend the abdominal cavity, but it does require some pressure nevertheless. However, in hysteroscopy, the same rule applies, but here the cavity that you're going to look at is not a flimsy or a thin walled cavity. It is a thick muscular cavity, and the muscle tends to keep the cavity continuously closed. It is not an open cavity. For you to be able to look inside the cavity, you must distend the cavity with something. Only when you distend or fluff up the cavity with something, you will be able to see inside. So how are you going to fluff up or how are you going to distend the cavity? If you just introduce the hysteroscope inside the uterine cavity, the hysteroscope will meet the closed walls of the cavity. The hysteroscope will keep passing between two closed walls of the cavity and you will see nothing. You will see only red color. Therefore, the hysteroscope always needs to be put in an outer covering, and this covering is called the hysteroscope sheath. Okay, so this is the hysteroscope, and this is the hysteroscope which has been put inside the hysteroscope sheath. Okay, there are different types of hysteroscope sheath available that also we are going to look at, but for now there is a hysteroscope and there is a hysteroscope sheath. Okay. The second concept that you need to remember, a hysteroscope always has 30-degree vision, always 30-degree vision. What does it mean when we say 30-degree vision? Let's say that we have a telescope which is like this. Okay. The telescope is like this. That means the telescope is like a straight rod and the front is a straight cut. When the light rays will come out from this telescope, so you are looking from here, and when the light rays come out of this telescope, they will come out like this. So you will be able to see exactly what is in front of your eyes. However, this concept, this first one, this is what we call as a 0-degree telescope. Okay, pardon the drawing, I'm using a mouse. But a hysteroscope is a 30-degree telescope. 30-degree telescope means that the build of the telescope is like this. If this is the telescope, the front part which was straight here has got an oblique 30-degree cut. Okay, the part is not straight, it has a 30-degree cut. So when you are looking from here, you are not actually seeing what is in front of you, but you are seeing what is at an angulated view or below you. I hope this part is clear because this is important to understand. You could have a 0-degree laparoscope or a 30-degree laparoscope, but when it comes to hysteroscope, the instrument is always 30 degrees. There are other instruments also, other hysteroscopes also, which are of different degrees for more advanced surgery, but you do not need to know. As far as you are concerned, the instrument is always 30 degrees. Okay. Now, why 30 degrees? How does it help you actually in the surgery is something that is not asked in the exam, and therefore I am not going to cover it. It is important for somebody who is learning practically how to do hysteroscopy. We are not going to touch up upon that. At the end of the lecture, if you feel that it is still significant and people ask you, then I will tell you. But as of now, just remember that the telescope or the hysteroscope is always a 30-degree instrument. Okay. Now let's move on to the next slide. Clear this, and we go on to the next slide. Right. So in this slide, you will see that sometimes they ask you what all equipment is required for doing hysteroscopic surgery. So obviously, you require the telescope. Other than the telescope, you require something to illuminate the inside of the uterine cavity. Illumination of the inside of the uterine cavity is done by what is called as a light source. Okay, this is a light source. Before we move on, there are a couple of things that so far have not been asked in the exam but are significantly important. So we'll just take a minute to clarify those points before we move on. Every light source that we use in laparoscopy or hysteroscopy is referred to as a cold light source. What does the word cold light source actually mean? Essentially, if you look at science, we have still not invented a way by which light can be generated at one point without generating heat. This invention has still not happened. Therefore, the problem that we face is twofold. If we are going to have a source that generates light for us, the heat that is created because of the light will damage the interior of the uterus. So we do not want that to happen. So what can we do about it? What has been done about it is that a light source has been created. So this is the light source. It generates light. There is a large fan inside this light source that cools down the light generating bulb so that the light generating bulb remains cool. And the light which is transmitted by a, fiber optic cable. This is also known as a light cable or a fiber optic cable. How does the fiber optic cable actually transmit light? The fiber optic cable is made up of a series of prisms. Therefore, when I don't know if you remember the principles of physics now, and they are not very important from the exam point of view, but it would be wise to remember that if you remember that if light is incident upon a prism or any glass surface for that matter, at a particular angle, the light would undergo refraction, then more refraction. But when you make the light incident upon the glass surface at a particular angle, at this angle, the light would simply reflect from the glass without causing any transmission into the glass. Okay, this phenomenon we call as total internal reflection. So just for your knowledge, for the exam point of view, the light cable has got a series of prisms inside it, and each of these prisms reflects the light so that at the tip of the light cable, there is only light and minimum heat. It is not that there is no heat, there is still a significant amount of heat, but the major problem which we were facing of being able to generate light at one point and take only the light away from that point and feed it to another source without transmitting heat, that problem is now solved because of this cold light source and light cable. Now, having understood the physics behind it, you also would need to know that there are three different types of light sources that are available. You just need to know the names, the technicalities not required. If you feel that somebody has ever asked you, put it up on the group. I will explain more in detail, but nobody has ever asked. The oldest light sources that were available were called halogen light sources. They used to give out yellow light. And now the light sources that we use are called either xenon light sources or LED light sources. Both of these give out bright white light. This much is more than enough for a postgraduate student to know as far as the light source is concerned. So we finished with the telescope, we finished with the light source and the light cable. Now we are looking at the camera itself. What does the camera do? The camera acts as your eye. Obviously, you cannot keep peeping into the telescope every time. So the camera collects the image from here, transmits the image to the camera control unit, and then this camera control unit transmits the image to the monitor where you see the actual picture. There are a lot of technicalities involved in what are the types of cameras, what are their advantages, what are their disadvantages. You really don't need to know any of that because it frankly does not concern you even the slightest bit in the exams. Okay, interested students, we will take maybe another session, but for exam point of view, I would sincerely suggest not to go and learn something which is going to crowd your mind. There are many other things to learn which are more important, particularly in mainstream OBGY than endoscopy. Right. So coming to now the more important exam questions, the stuff that has been asked in the exam. Like I told you before, the uterus is a muscular organ. So obviously the muscular organ will not distend unless you apply some distension pressure. So the questions are, why is distension required? And how much distension pressure is required and why? Let's try and answer these two questions. Why is distension required? I already told you. Distension, giving distension makes sure that the walls of the uterus are going to be spread apart and you will be able to see inside. And how much distension pressure is required? You generally require a distension pressure of between 80 to 120 millimeters of mercury to be able to perform hysteroscopy without any problem. So the answer for the exam point of view is 80 to 120 millimeters of mercury. Okay, let's look at what are the distension apparatuses available with us. So like I said before, uterus is a muscular organ with an obliterated cavity. A pressurized fluid is needed to separate the walls so that the interior can be seen. This pressurized fluid may be delivered either by gravity or by a pressure bag or by a pump. We need to maintain the pressure between 80 to 120 millimeters of mercury. So then what is the need of the pressure bag or the pump? I request all of the attendees not to use the annotate function on your screens because it shows up on everybody's screens and we are having disturbances. Okay, so whatever you need to write down, please write down, but don't use the annotate because it is reflecting on everybody's screen.
So
Right.
can you make that full screen slideshow? You can start.
I can start slideshow, but the problem is the computer transmission becomes jerky sometimes. This is not clear, very clear what I am projecting.
So it is clear, but people are asking to make it.
Okay, I'll make it full screen. In case we again have problems, I'll go back to the old view
Yes,
because
sir, that will
yesterday we were having some issues. Anyway, here goes. So slideshow, right. So this we already said, right. So why do we need a pressure regulation unit? Obviously, as you are doing hysteroscopy, more and more fluid is going to start escaping out, and we need something to keep this fluid inside. So we use a apparatus which is called as a hystromat. Okay, the hystromat is nothing but a similar concept as the CO2 insufflator which we use in laparoscopy. The only difference is here you get two readings, the volume per minute in ml. So this is the volume per minute, that means the flow rate at which the fluid is going into the cavity, and this is the pressure in millimeters of mercury which you have to set, the pressure that you want the uterus to be at. Okay, so these are the two readings that you can set on the hystromat, and the hystromat will do the job of pumping the saline inside the uterine cavity and maintaining the distension pressure at a level that you wanted. Okay, I hope this much is clear. That is the job that the hystromat does. More advanced discussion on the hystromat is just not required. So let us move on. Meenal, everything okay till this stage?
Yes, sir.
Any specific problem from the student side that is
Nothing.
wanting to be addressed? No.
Nothing.
Fine. So let's go on to the next slide now. Okay, like I said, we seem to be stuck with the presentation. No, the slide won't move and I have to go back to the older view. Just hold on. Right, so I'm sorry, but you will have to make do with this. I'll try to enlarge it a little bit like this, but that is the best that I can do.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so this particular one does require a slideshow, so we'll go on the slideshow. This is the design of the hysteroscope sheath and the two types of hysteroscope sheath that are available. See, the operative sheath has got two parts, okay? There is an outer part and an inner part. And if we look at the names of each of these, this is the inner sheath. The inner sheath has got a channel where you can attach the saline tubing. There is an outer sheath, and the outer sheath has got one more channel on itself. So the inner sheath has got a channel which is called the inflow channel, and the outer sheath has got a channel which is called the outflow channel. So how does fluid actually flow when you start the flow of fluid in hysteroscopy? Let's see that. Fluid comes in through the inflow channel, goes through the hysteroscope. If this is the uterus over here, fluid goes through the inner sheath, so enters from inflow channel, goes through inner sheath, circulates inside the uterus. Then the outer sheath is riding on the inner sheath. You can see here that the outer sheath has been placed over the inner sheath. That means this entire assembly goes into this assembly. Is that clear? This entire assembly goes into this assembly, and the final thing when assembled looks like this. So this here you can see this is the inlet port of the inner sheath, and this is the outlet port of the outer sheath. Okay, these are the two things assembled together, and these are them separately. So the fluid goes inside, it circulates into the uterus. Then when you feel that the vision is not clear or there is blood, you open the outflow channel. This is a key that can be opened and closed. You open the outflow channel and the fluid goes in through these holes that you are seeing and comes out from the outflow channel. Okay, this concept of movement of the fluid and this design of the hysteroscope is what we describe as a through flow sheath. A through flow sheath. What would happen if the design was not this way? Suppose I make only one single metal tube, put an inflow channel here, and I put another outflow channel over here. The fluid will come from inside and will leave from here. Okay, the fluid will come from here and leave from here, leaving nothing to go here and distend the uterine cavity. So this is the design of the sheath which we are using in the present day. Now there is another port that you see over here in addition to all these. I'm going to clear this, and that is this one, and this is the operative port. Okay, what happens through the operative port? No saline is going in, no saline is going out, but what is going inside is the instrument, like the hysteroscopic scissor or the hysteroscopic grasper, and it is going inside doing the job of cutting or grasping or whatever, and then coming out. So three different channels: inflow, outflow, operating channel. Inflow, outflow, operating channel. It would be very rare for you to be asked in the exam, unless you are doing phenomenally well, to name which is the inflow channel and which is the outflow channel. This is something that maybe would be expected from an MUHS fellow who is doing fellowship in endoscopy, but not from a regular postgraduate student. But in any case, it is worthwhile to remember that the port which is closer to the surgeon, so if I am the surgeon and I am on this side, the port which is closer to the surgeon is the inflow. The port which is away from the surgeon is the outflow. Of course, you have to hold the telescope correctly with the eyepiece facing towards you, otherwise that will all go wrong. But the port that is towards the surgeon is the inflow, port away from the surgeon is the outflow. So I hope you understood the assembly. Inflow channel, inflow inner sheath, outer sheath, both of them assembled looks like this. You saw the telescope at that time, which I showed in the starting. That telescope will go here. Okay, I hope this is quite amply clear to everybody. Fine, Minal, we'll move ahead.
Yes, sir. We'll go ahead.
Okay, so now let's move on to the next slide. I think I'll need to end the slideshow here. Let's see if this works. No, even this does not work, so we'll end the show. Right, so how to perform diagnostic hysteroscopy? There is a short video that you need to see. Right, so let's look at this video.
So why does a diagnostic sheath has got only one channel? It does not have the outer and the inner sheaths.
Yeah, so first of all, I would request you to put your question in the chat or on the group, because if everybody starts asking questions, there will be utter chaos. In any case, I will answer your question. You asked why the diagnostic sheath has only one channel and the operative sheaths have got multiple channels. Is that your question? Am I correct? Meenal, was that his question or am I mistaken?
Yes, sir. No, that was his question.
Fine. So actually you do not need to know this. Again, I don't know. Is all of this actually asked to all of you? Anyway, let's not get into that. See, the diagnostic sheet does not essentially have always only one channel. This what I have shown here is the older model of the diagnostic sheet. Earlier, when the concepts of hysteroscopy were not so profound, people used to believe that we could have a channel where we would bring in saline from here. Saline would go inside, irrigate the uterus, and then through the cervical opening itself, the extra saline would drain out, giving you a clear view. So this diagnostic sheath is the older model of the diagnostic sheath. Now the diagnostic sheet that we have available is still comprising of two parts. So it will have an inner sheet, it will have an outer sheet, it will have an inflow channel, it will have an outflow channel, so that we get the through flow mechanism that we are expecting. However, this inner sheath and outer sheath is not the way to differentiate between a diagnostic sheath and an operative sheath. What the diagnostic sheath doesn't have, which the operative sheath has, is this, the operative channel. And it is through this operative channel that instruments can be passed. So the difference between the diagnostic sheath and the operative sheath is not in the number of channels, but is in the presence of the operative channel through which an instrument can be passed. So if a sheath is given to you and it is asked to you whether this is a diagnostic sheath or whether it is an operative sheath, the fact whether it has only one inflow channel or an inflow channel along with an outflow channel is not important in making this diagnosis. What is important to make this diagnosis is the presence of this operative channel. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, can we move on?
Yes, sir.
In case you have a doubt, please type it in the chat box again if this point is not clear, and I'll explain more in more clarity. Okay, but for now we are moving on. Right. So let's look at the video that we were going to see. So this is the video of diagnostic hysteroscopy, and some concepts have to be understood over here.
Yes, started.
Oops. let me mute this. Okay, so see the assembly now. This is actual diagnostic hysteroscopy that is being done. This is the sheet that I have shown you. The camera, this is the telescope. The telescope has gone inside the sheath over here. The camera here in my hand has attached to the telescope over here. And I am able to see that there are 3 different channels that are being seen. 1, 2, and 3. Because I am holding the assembly correctly, the channel which is closer to me is the inflow channel. The channel which is away from me is the outflow channel. And this third channel is the operative channel. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now let's move ahead with the video. This is the light cable. I am going to attach the light cable to the light port. I am checking. This is the inflow. So, okay, see, these are the channels: camera, light cable, inflow, outflow, and outer channel. Now, I am going to attach something to the, my video is paused, so don't worry if it is not moving. I am going to attach something to the inflow channel to make sure that the saline comes inside the uterus. What am I attaching to the inflow channel? In surgical terms, we refer to it as the TUR set. The TUR is derived from transurethral resection of prostate. So it is called the TUR set or the TURP set, which is used in prostate resection surgeries actually, but we also use it. The name is not so much important as is the caliber or the thickness of the tube. What we require for doing hysteroscopy is a wide bore tube. A wide bore tube makes sure that sufficient amount of fluid comes inside the uterus and distends the uterus properly. You may be able to achieve the same effect by using an IV set, but it is quite likely that you will find it difficult. You may have also seen many times, even in your institute, that when there is somebody who is learning how to do hysteroscopy and a IV set is being used instead of a wide bore tubing, you are able to see, but the picture is not very clear. The distension of the uterine cavity is not very good because you may be having an excellent distension apparatus, but the tubing that is carrying that distension fluid to the uterus is thin bore, and therefore sufficient saline cannot go inside the patient's body. Okay, therefore you must always use a wide bore distension tubing. Okay, I hope this is clear. So I am going to attach the distension tubing to the inflow. Sometimes we also, so this is the TUR set which is being shown. Sometimes we also attach a tubing to the outflow so that the fluid that comes from within the uterus does not soil the patient's drapes entirely. It goes through the outflow channel into the tubing and then goes into the suction machine. This is also particularly useful when I am interested in calculation of how much fluid has gone inside versus how much fluid has gone out. Okay, so when I'm interested in measuring the fluid balance, I will connect the outflow to a suction apparatus and then I will measure how much is going into that suction apparatus. So let us start the video again. Right, so this is the TUR set. Here what we are using, if you can see these 2 bags, they are called as Medex bags or distension bags. This is another alternative to the more expensive Hystromat. It is used locally, it is used widely in India and abroad, but ideally if you are asked what is supposed to be used, your answer has to be Hystromat only. But the pressure bags, which are also called as the Medex pressure bags or the distension bags, are something that can be used to give adequate distension inside the uterine cavity. So let's move on. So this is the whole system which has been connected. Now I am going to start the flow of saline. So I ask my assistant to start the flow of saline, and here you can see that the saline has started. Okay. Now with the entire unit flushed out, With air being flushed out of the system, I am now ready to perform the diagnostic hysteroscopy. So let's go on ahead. Right. So before I perform the hysteroscopy, I have to do something which is called as white balance. So let's just to make sure that some of you, I don't know how much idea you have, but if you can, if anybody of you knows about white balance, can you please type in the chat box just that I volunteer and or I would like to speak, and one of you can tell us what white balance means. Somebody who is fairly sure of what white balance means, can you please put volunteer and type in the chat box, and Priyanka will, Meenal will unmute you and you can speak. Whoever volunteers, they can press their space bar. The mic becomes unmuted if you press the space bar and you can talk.
Yes, sir.
Just give us one single name. What? Nobody's volunteering?
They are typing the answer.
No,
Yes.
no, don't type the answer. I'd like to hear it. Just anybody,
Okay.
one person who's typing the answer, give out his name and we'll let him or her talk.
Okay. I'll unmute her.
Please tell the name so she can hear us and she can start talking.
Yes, Rupal.
Hello?
Rupal?
Yes, hello. Am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Rupal, please speak.
Uh,
We are 210 of us listening to you.
Sir, white balance means that we are, when a gauze piece, we are showing the machine that this is what a white color is, and all the other colors that we are seeing inside that are in relative to the pixel adjustment will be relative to what we show as white. Hence, we have to show white first in the as a gauze piece.
Perfect, perfect. So that is the perfect answer. Please mute her, Meenal. We will continue. So what white balance actually does is the camera has to be taught how to recognize white color. So once the camera knows that this particular color is white, it processes all the other colors accordingly and it shows you correct colors. In order to give you a good example, if you had to confuse the camera, you could put, instead of a white gauze piece, a green sheet in front of the camera and then do the white balance. Once you have done the white balance, the machine will still say white balance okay, but once you enter the abdominal cavity with a laparoscope, the bowel will start looking green, the liver will start looking purple, the peritoneum will start looking a shade of gray, and many different colors. So what you have to remember is white balance has to be done before starting the surgery by keeping a white surface in front of the telescope and with the light source on. So you have to take all the settings that you would need to perform the surgery, do the white balance, and then start your surgery. So that is about white balance. The next step that I'm going to do is to put a white gauze in front of the camera and do the white balance. And on the TV, it will tell me white balance okay, which means that I'm fine and I can now begin with the surgery. So now let us look at how the surgery is actually done. Beyond this point is not very significant for you. So we'll move on with the presentation and then we'll come back to this later if you wish. Okay. Now, the next thing that we have to specifically look at is a very important theory question that has been asked several times, and that is office hysteroscopy. So what exactly is office hysteroscopy? Does it mean that hysteroscopy is done in an office and not in the hospital? Does it mean that hysteroscopy is done on an outpatient basis? Does it mean that hysteroscopy is done without anesthesia? So which of these terms best defines the concept of office hysteroscopy? In order to understand this, let us unwind just for a minute and see how this concept came into being. So office hysteroscopy or outpatient hysteroscopy was started in in Europe, particularly in Belgium. In fact, yesterday we had Professor Bruno van Arendal with us, and he and Professor Stefano Betocchi were the ones who started office hysteroscopy first. So what they felt at that time was that we required the procedure to be done without anesthesia, without admission in the OPD, so that the patient would save on time and the patient would tremendously save on expenses. However, they faced several problems. The first problem was how to ensure that this procedure is pain-free, because you're going to dilate the cervix. So how do you ensure that the procedure is pain-free? It is very difficult. Second thing, how do you make sure that you are able to adequately distend the uterine cavity when the patient is awake? So these were the two problems that they faced, but they started looking for more and more options. And let's see how office hysteroscopy evolved. So they wanted to make the procedure painless, one, and they wanted to do it in the OPD without requiring anesthesia. These were the two requirements that enabled office hysteroscopy to take birth. So when we perform office hysteroscopy, yes, we actually perform office hysteroscopy in the OPD. This is performed without any kind of anesthesia. So genuine office hysteroscopy does not require sedation, does not require spinal, does not require GA, does not require any anesthesia. There are several variants being practiced, but for the exam point of view, office hysteroscopy means hysteroscopy without anesthesia. So the question is, why not give anesthesia? What is so wrong in giving anesthesia? The problem with giving anesthesia is once you give anesthesia, the patient has to stay as an inpatient in the hospital. The patient who is working, the patient who is going to office every day would not require to miss work or to miss their daily routine for a simple diagnostic procedure. If you could offer them a simple procedure that can be done in 15 minutes without anesthesia, the patient could walk into your OPD and the patient could walk out of your OPD. And I'm sure that if you were in the patient's shoes, you would also choose a procedure that does not require you to get admitted in the hospital. Hence, the procedure requirement to be done without anesthesia. So in office hysteroscopy, what exactly is so different from routine hysteroscopy? There are a lot of things which are different. Let's see this. And this is the only table that you will need to know to synthesize any answer on office hysteroscopy, be it long or short or to the point or whatever. Okay, so let's look at this table carefully. In routine hysteroscopy, the telescope is a larger telescope. Most commonly, the dimension of the telescope or the thickness of the telescope that we use is a 4mm telescope. Okay. In office hysteroscopy, we use smaller telescopes. These are either 2.9 or 1.9 millimeters in size. So there is a huge reduction in the size of the telescope. Mind you, 4mm is not very large and 3mm is not very small. But this 1mm difference makes all the difference being able to enter the cervix without anesthesia. So when I say 4mm and 3mm, it's only a millimeter, but it's a huge difference. The sheath. We are going to look at the sheath more again, but in routine hysteroscopy, the sheath that we use is a circular sheath. In office hysteroscopy, the sheath that we use is a pear-shaped sheath. Details again not required for your level, but just to give you an idea, the external os. So if we are looking at the cervix sitting in front of the patient, if the patient in lithotomy position, you will find that a lot of times the cervix, or rather this is what Professor Stefano Bertocchi found, is that the external os is a antero-posterior slit. Likewise, this is the external os, so I'll call it E. And the internal os, he said, is a transverse slit. I will call it I. Okay. So with the external os being a vertical slit and the internal os being a transverse slit, what we are trying to do is our telescope, this telescope which I am saying, or rather the sheath that I am talking about, the sheath that we initially had in hysteroscopy was a circular sheath. Okay, a circular sheath. They said that because we are trying to force a circular sheath through an oblong opening, The sheath is not entering properly and the patient is having pain. They said, what if instead of the circular sheath, we could make the sheath pear-shaped or oblong or oblique or whatever you call it, this shape. It is called in correct terminology as pear-shaped because it is not even like this. The shape actually is like this, a pear shape. Okay. So if he said that if you could convert the circular sheath, Professor Bitoki said, if you could convert the circular sheath into a pear-shaped sheath, then you would be able to enter the os well. And therefore, the shape of that sheath changed from circular sheath to a pear-shaped sheath. And this became known as the Betoki sheath, which is used today. Okay, this from Professor Stefano Betoki. So second important difference, first is telescope, second is sheath. Third, in routine hysteroscopy, dilatation of cervix is always needed. Always needed. First dilate, then enter. However, in office hysteroscopy, you almost never require dilatation. The office hysteroscope is so small and the design of the sheath is so precise that you are able to enter under vision. Enter under vision means that you actually see the layers of the cervix or the passages of the cervix and the uterine cavity opening up, and as the passage opens you go inside, then more opens, you go inside again. Therefore, dilatation was the main problem with which we were facing difficulty for doing office hysteroscopy. Once the requirement for dilatation was removed, performing office hysteroscopy became very easy. So third difference, dilatation of the cervix always needed, dilatation of the cervix mostly never needed. Last point, because dilatation of the cervix is needed, there is always a possibility of a false passage, particularly in patients with cervical stenosis. And a lot of patients you will find in practice have got cervical stenosis. In office hysteroscopy, however, on the other hand, there is no false passage, obviously, because you are seeing where you are going. You are not dilating first and entering later. You are seeing and you are entering. So there is no false passage and no cervical trauma. This much is more than enough information for you for office hysteroscopy. You can make an answer of any size, read up more. You have more questions, we will take them. But even a endoscopic surgeon will not need to know more than this to answer a question of office hysteroscopy. So we will call it enough at this, and then we will go over to the next slide. Right. So I did talk about the sheaths, and here we can see. So if you look here, this is the older sheath. This is a circle, and then we changed over to this. This is the pear-shaped sheath. Okay, this is the circular sheath. We were finding it difficult to pass it inside, and now this sheath is a pear-shaped sheath which goes inside very well. Meenal, we are clear so far?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. So we'll move on now. Right. So let us look at one video of office hysteroscopy before we move on. The third concept in office hysteroscopy, which I did not tell you, was the concept which they called as the vaginoscopy hysteroscopy technique. They in Europe are extremely careful about the way that they talk to women and about their dignity when it comes to examination of women. So they decided that when a lady is being examined in the OPD, it is very demeaning for the lady to undergo the stress of the speculum being inserted into the vagina. As long as this speculum and valsellum are there, the lady will never be comfortable enough for us to perform diagnostic hysteroscopy. And so they said, we must find out a method by which the requirement of the speculum and the valsellum can be totally done away with. So they invented this procedure, which we call as vaginoscopy hysteroscopy. This is also something that performs a part of office hysteroscopy. let's see the vaginoscopy hysteroscopy technique. In vaginoscopy hysteroscopy, I'm not using speculum, I'm not using valcellum, I'm only using the hysteroscope sheath and the distension system. As I go inside, I first see the folds of the vagina. Okay, my video is paused. Do not worry, my video is paused. As I go inside, I first see the folds of the vagina. Then when I see the folds of the vagina, I manipulate my telescope. And when I manipulate my telescope, I start seeing the cervix. Remember again, I have not inserted speculum. I have not inserted valcellum. The lady is awake. She can see on the screen with you if you want her to, right? So I am able to see the cervix now. As I am seeing the cervix, this here is the cervix. Again, going back, this is the posterior fornix of the vagina. I am bringing my telescope back. As I come back, I see this large cervix protruding, looking at me. I enter into the external os. These are the arbor vitae or the folds of the cervix. I enter into the cervix. Note that I am going under vision completely, not with any prior dilatation. As slowly as the hysteroscope walks into the uterine cavity, my distending fluid itself creates the pressure I require to act as a dilator and open up the cervix as I enter inside. So as I come close to the internal os, the fluid itself opens up the internal os. You can see this is much larger than what it was before, and gradually my telescope enters inside the uterine cavity. So this is the concept of vaginoscopy hysteroscopy technique. Okay, do not use speculum, do not use valcellum. Go into the vagina, see the vaginal mucosa, see the cervix, go inside the cervix and examine the uterine cavity. Once inside the uterine cavity, it is simple. I'm sure a lot of you have already seen this. You see the ostium on one side, the ostium on the other side, a spacious cavity, and this particular patient has got no significant abnormality seen. You can see the endometrium nicely. These small dots, I don't know if they are appreciable on the screen. These are endometrial glands, and the whole picture is of a very good uterine cavity without any abnormality at all. Okay, so this is the ostium. As I reduce the pressure, you will see that the ostium opens and closes, opens and closes, again closed, and increase pressure, open. This is also called as a fish mouth phenomenon, and it indicates that the tubal ostia are very healthy. Okay, I'm going to stop this video now. Clear till now, Minal?
Yes, sir.
Fine. So I will now stop this and we will go back to the presentation. It's 10 o'clock. I will have to wind up in some time. Right. Coming to the next important question, distension media. Distension media is again a very important question from the theory point of view. I'm sorry. Right. So what are the distension media that we use? The commonest distension medium that is used is normal saline, 0.9% saline or normal saline. So if there is some examiners for the heck of it, if there is a normal saline, is there an abnormal saline? No, there is no abnormal saline. It is either normal saline or there is hypertonic saline. Normal saline we call normal because the concentration is almost equal to the blood. Therefore, the electrolyte balance is almost equal to the blood. Therefore, it is referred to as a normal saline. The second distension medium that can be used is glycine, and it is referred to as 1.5% glycine. Okay. Other distension media of historic importance, and these are not used now. Okay, period, not used now. So only for theory answer, not for practical exam. CO2 gas or air was used years before, caused multiple air embolisms, given up. Dextran or dextrose, very high viscous solution, very high in sugar content, used to damage the telescope, not used now, and several others, but we are really not interested in any of these. So the only ones that we are looking at are particularly normal saline and glycine. Okay, so now let us see the next slide. Where was I? Right. Okay. So what is the primary difference between normal saline and glycine, and why, which one is preferred and why? Okay, this is another very important slide from the theory point of view. Like I said before, normal saline is isoosmolar. Isoosmolar means that the concentration in the blood, or the osmolality is same as that of the blood, meaning from a practical perspective, it is equal in electrolyte concentration with the blood. Glycine, on the other hand, is hypoosmolar. It is having a lesser, or it is hygroscopic in nature, if one were to speak in simple terms. So if this normal saline mixes with the blood, it does not change the composition of blood that much. If glycine mixes with the blood, it draws water from the extracellular compartment. Because of drawing this water, it dilutes the blood. Because of this dilution, it causes hyponatremia, which is low sodium. Because of this hyponatremia, there is cerebral edema, giving rise to CNS symptoms. Also, because of dilution of the blood, there is some effect on the lungs. It causes pulmonary congestion and pulmonary edema. Okay, so glycine mixes with the blood, causes hyponatremia. This causes cerebral edema and also causes pulmonary edema. These are the major side effects of glycine. What about the molecular weight? The molecular weight is low here. If you provoke diuresis, that means if you give IV Lasix, the normal saline will get quickly flushed out by the kidneys. Glycine, on the other hand, has got high molecular weight. It won't pass through the glomerular membranes very easily and stays in the body longer. Okay. Therefore, for all practical purposes, normal saline is preferred and glycine is avoided. Okay. Is this much clear? This one slide will answer many theory questions that are asked to you, particularly in the DNB exam. Okay, Meenal, we can proceed?
Yes, sir.
Fine. So now, if anybody has any specific doubts, let me know. If there is a significant point that I have missed out, I can clarify now or otherwise later. Just keep following the chat box.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So coming to the big question, if glycine has so much of problem, then why the hell is glycine used at all? Why don't we stop using glycine completely? The answer lies in a different concept. So to understand that, let us look at this surgery, which we call hysteroscopic myoma resection. Okay. This is hysteroscopic myoma resection. You've seen what the normal uterus looks like. Now in this case, we are going into the uterine cavity. You can see this large bulge here. This large bulge is a submucous fibroid. I'll play the video. This is a large submucous fibroid. You can see it is occupying the entire uterine cavity. My telescope is going further inside. There is another fibroid here at the fundus. Okay, so she has got two very large submucous fibroids that need to be removed. How am I going to remove this? I cannot possibly cut it with a scissor. So what am I going to do if I cannot cut it with the scissor? I am going to use an instrument which I call the monopolar loop. Okay, what is this monopolar loop? The monopolar loop has got a loop like this. I'm going to give it a very high voltage cutting current. So after yesterday's discussion, I'm not going to talk about cutting current more, but I'm going to give a high voltage cutting current to this loop. This cutting current is causing, and the instrument that I'm using is a monopolar instrument. For those of you who have understood yesterday's lecture, when I'm using a monopolar instrument, what do I want? I want that the current pass from the loop, and I expect that the current will pass from the loop into the fibroid, into the uterus, into the patient's body, then into the patient plate and back to the machine. This will complete the flow of circuit like I described yesterday, and we will get the cutting effect. So let me play this and show you. I am starting the cutting. You can see the loop is cutting, it cuts off one piece. Again, it cuts off the other piece. Again, it cuts off the third piece. So actually, what is the loop doing? The loop is passing very high voltage current from the loop, and this current is going into the fibroid at a concentrated current density. Therefore, it is able to cut the fibroid. Like I explained to you yesterday, if the return electrode is not attached properly, it will cause burns, and the current is causing burns when it enters through your pencil electrode because the current concentration is high. Likewise, here also the current concentration at the tip of the loop is very high, and therefore the loop is able to cut the fibroid into small pieces, and I am able to shave the fibroid. This much is understood?
Yes, sir.
Right. So, but I am not doing laparoscopy now. I am doing hysteroscopy. So what do I want? When I am activating the current, let us say that I am using normal saline. Now you all know that normal saline is an electrolyte medium. Because it is an electrolyte medium, it is a good conductor of electricity. If it is a good conductor of electricity, then the electric current that I want to pass from the loop into the fibroid will pass into the fibroid, agreed. But a significant amount of this current will also pass into the normal saline which is there in the uterine cavity. Will it cause the patient any harm? No. But the problem that it will do, it will not give me an adequate effect at the level of the loop. So my loop will not be able to cut better because I wanted the energy to be directed through a specific narrow area, and now the energy is flowing as if it was flowing into the return electrode. So I am not getting the desired amount of cut that I require. So what do I want? I want a solution, or I want a medium which is colorless, which is transparent, which is non-toxic, and which is a bad conductor of electricity. Unfortunately for me, saline is everything else, but it is not a bad conductor of electricity. It is a good conductor of electricity. And now the problem. In saline, I can use a scissor, I can use a grasper, but how do I use current? If I use current, I cannot use saline. And if I'm using saline, I cannot use current, meaning that I cannot take out this fibroid. So there comes the role of glycine. Glycine is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and everything else less that you want to add for the sake of completing the answer. But most importantly, it is transparent and it is a bad conductor of electricity. Because it is a bad conductor of electricity, it shows me the view that I want, and it does not take up the electricity within it, allowing electricity to pass from the loop into the fibroid and giving me the cut of the fibroid that I so keenly desire. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Clear.
Yeah. If somebody has not understood, please post it in the chat box, but I don't think there is a simpler way to explain this. So again, the loop is cutting, 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 and this effect can be achieved only when we are having a current that is not being taken away by the electrolyte medium. Hence the requirement of using the electrolyte medium glycine when you're doing resectoscopic surgery. So we will stop that. We will go back to the slide. Right. So that is the reason why glycine is used in the first place. Okay. We already saw the hysteroscopic myoma resection. So let's see this now. Right. So normal saline, good conductor of electricity, can't be used with monopolar energy. The current will spread into the medium and there will be no effect on the target tissue. Glycine, bad conductor, can be used with monopolar energy. The medium will distend the uterus and no current will dissipate through the medium, giving the best cutting effect on the fibroid. I hope this is very clear. Now, the next question. So we are clear on two counts. We don't want to use glycine because it has got side effects, but we still would like to use electricity. How can we achieve this? We want to use we don't want to use glycine, but we want to use electricity, the answer is use bipolar current. We saw yesterday, bipolar current does not require return electrode. Bipolar current does not require energy to pass through the patient's body. So, introducing the bipolar resectoscope. Okay, what is the bipolar resectoscope? There is a bridge between the two ends of the loop. This bridge acts as a return electrode. The circuit is completed here only. The current enters through this, goes into the system and jumps back from the return electrode, giving the cut that you desire at the local level, but without passing any energy through the patient. When you don't need energy to pass through the patient back to the return electrode, and the return electrode is so close to the primary electrode, you can go back to using saline. So we are able to use saline. We are able to give the patient all the benefits of saline. Glycine is removed from the picture and we have got safe surgery. In the present day and age, it is only the bipolar resectoscope which is used. And as far as you are concerned, if you are asked in the exam, you will answer that, sir or madam, bipolar energy is the best when it has to be used underwater. I have seen glycine being used, but as a recommendation, it would be best to use saline. And if saline is used, then what we require is the bipolar generator with the underwater cut technology. Just remember this word in order to complete your answer. We require a bipolar generator with underwater cut technology. Your regular bipolar generator will not give you this effect. Okay. So that is it about monopolar energy, bipolar energy, glycine, saline, and their side effects. These things constitute most of the questions that are ever asked in the theory exam, except for one last point which is remaining, after which we will conclude this lecture. And that concept is called as fluid balance. Okay. Let us say we are looking at, so let us say that I am doing a hysteroscopy. This is the uterus, this is the cervix, this is the vagina. Let us see what is happening now. There is some fluid which is going into the vagina and into the internal os, okay, into the external os. What are the possible ways by which this fluid can come out of the os? One, it can either leak out through the external os, okay. Second one, it can either diffuse from the patient's tubes into the uterine cavity, into the peritoneal cavity. So it could either come out from the external os, it could go via the tubes into the peritoneal cavity, or the third way that this saline could be lost is by diffusion of the fluid from the uterus into the open uterine channels or the open venous sinuses that are there in the uterus and go directly into the patient's bloodstream. Okay, so three ways that the fluid could be lost. Either it goes out into the through the external os, or it goes via the tubes into the peritoneal cavity, or gets lost directly in the bloodstream. So when I am doing hysteroscopic surgery, an assistant is asked to make a chart, and on one side of this chart we write in, on the other side of the chart we write out. Suppose I have connected my first bottle of normal saline, which is 1000 ml. I write 1000 ml in the in. Then I use up one more saline. I write 1000 ml more in the in. Then I connect one bottle of glycine. I write 3000 ml in the in. So how much total has gone inside? 5000 ml of fluid has gone in the patient's body. But has all of that actually gone in the patient's body? No. I showed you earlier that we have an outflow, and this outflow is connected to the suction bottle. So I asked my nurse, how much is the outflow? And she tells me that it is 1700 ml in the suction bottle. Then I check the bucket which is there between the patient's legs on the ground, and that bucket has got 1500 ml which came out through the cervix, like I told you before. I also add 500 ml roughly for the wet drapes which we cannot count the fluid loss in. And I get a value of 3,700. So what is my total deficit? 5,000 minus 3,700. 1,300 ml of fluid can be assumed to have gone inside the patient's body. Okay. So the in minus the out is equal to the deficit. How are we going to use this? At a deficit of 1500 ml of glycine or 2000 ml of saline, deficit, mind you, not used. I could use 10 more bottles here and there could be still more outflow coming out from here and I would do surgery. But when the deficit reaches 1500 ml of glycine or 2000 ml of saline, the surgery has to be stopped. Stopped means stopped, regardless of how much pathology is remaining behind. So I could have half the fibroid remaining behind in the uterine cavity and I would still have to stop the surgery, because beyond this point of time, I am really going to push the patient into pulmonary edema. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Also, the second thing that one needs to understand is that this calculation of deficit cannot be done at the end of surgery. It has to be done between the surgery. So for example, I attach one bottle of saline, one bottle of saline, and here at this stage, I ask my assistant to measure the fluid balance or the intake output. My assistant tells me the fluid balance is fine, sir. It is just 500 ml. I know I can continue. Suppose I do this 1000, 1000, 3000, 5000. Let's say another, sorry, not 5000, 3000. And I put one more 3000 here without measuring the deficit. And I finish the whole surgery. And then the assistant tells me that, sir, the total deficit is 3000 ml. I have already pushed the patient into pulmonary edema. Therefore, the fluid deficit has to be measured at regular intervals during the surgery, and I'm sorry, not at the end of surgery, and at a deficit of 1500 ml of glycine or 2000 ml of saline, the case has to be stopped. Right. So now this is my last slide. Don't worry about complications of hysteroscopy. We are going to see that later, but this is just one last slide which I want you to see. And management of complications. What do you do for fluid overload? You give propped up position, nasal O2, give IV Lasix, and measure the serum sodium. Okay. Correction of serum sodium is done only if the serum sodium is severely low. So some little bit low serum sodium, you just give Lasix and the body will control it. If you give sodium from outside, that means if you give, there is some disturbance. If you give hypertonic saline from outside, you may cause overcorrection, and this will lead to an even more dreaded complication, and that complication is called spontaneous myelinosis. Please, whosoever's audio is on, it is really disturbing. There are 200 of us listening. I would request you to check your individual headphones and please mute. Perforation. If there is a cold perforation, that means if you perforate with dilators, you can just do a diagnostic laparoscopy, assess the damage. In case it is not bleeding, leave it alone or just fulgurate with a bipolar cautery. But if you have done a hot perforation, that means if you have perforated with an active electrode, there is a possibility that the current has jumped beyond the perforation into the bowel and you require a surgeon to inspect the bowel. The only other complication of significance is bleeding. We put in an intrauterine small Foley's catheter. A pediatric Foley's catheter, number 8 or number 10, is put inside the uterine cavity. The cavity is distended, and because of this inflated catheter, we get tamponade effect that stops the bleeding. Also, we can give IV tranexamic acid. Okay, I think that concludes my presentation. And we will take a 2-minute break, and then Dr. Priyanka will take over. So we are taking just a 2-minute break. It's already 10:20. Meanwhile, if you guys have any questions, please put it up in the chat box and I'll try my best to answer. I'm stopping slide sharing now. Meenal?
Yes, sir.